Last fall, as school districts just re-entered the 2021 school year, we had the pleasure of engaging in a conversation about access to technology and devices with then Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. We are excited to be joined again by the newly appointed acting chairwoman of the FCC. Congratulations, Chairwoman, on your appointment. I was reading your bio and I wanted to share the first paragraph, which has a statement that captures the spirit of your work and that I love. It says, Federal Communications Commission Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel believes that the future belongs to the connected. She works to promote greater opportunity, accessibility, and affordability in our communication services in order to ensure that all Americans get a fair shot at 21st century success. Chairwoman, it's been a challenging year, as we all know, for our 50+ million students in the United States, and exponentially more so for low-income and of-color students and families. We're 13 months after the start of the pandemic, and we still have 3 million students or more that have been literally cut off from learning. I would love to invite you to share opening remarks and updates on federal support for students and families since we last met.
Thank you so much, Kim. It is always a treat to join the League of Innovative Schools. And as you were mentioning, the last time we talked, it was October. And 6 months is a long time ago, even though I think the days are kind of hard to count during this pandemic period. But there's actually a lot that has changed in those 6 months. I'll start by acknowledging that I'm no longer just a commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission. I'm now the acting chair. Mm-hmm. But really important for this gathering is we have some new powers at the FCC, courtesy of Congress, to help get students connected. And I want to share a little bit about that with you today. Of course, there's also another draw in coming back and speaking to the League. It's the fact that I'm going to get to talk to students today about the good and not so good associated with remote learning, the upsides and downsides of having to connect. And I'm also hoping from that conversation we'll get some discussion about where the connectivity gaps are that are holding back education in this country. And I also want to talk a little bit about the work we're going to be able to do because of this new legislation to help close some of those divides. So everyone here has heard of the digital divide. It's a way of talking about the haves and have-nots when it comes to having high-speed internet service in this country. But as you know, I think we should always talk about what that means for students and what I call the homework gap. And the reason I started calling it that is that I studied and found that 7 in 10 teachers were assigning homework that required internet access. But FCC data said 1 in 3 households doesn't have broadband. And so where those numbers overlap is what I started calling the homework gap. And everyone in education knows who those kids are. They're the ones who would linger after school in the parking lot after the final bell had rung just to be able to use the Wi-Fi signal at school to finish their nightly schoolwork. They're the same kids who would sit at the fast food restaurant and do their homework with a side of fries, or in the parking lot at the library, just trying again to catch a free Wi-Fi signal, the laptop perched on their knees. Now, those were in the before times, because during this pandemic, those same kids who are caught in the homework gap have been locked out of the virtual classroom. And, the numbers are rough. It says there's between 16 and 17 million of them in the United States that lack the home broadband connection they need to complete their assignments and keep up with their classmates. And the data also show that these children are disproportionately Black, Latino, and American Indian or Alaska Natives. And by the way, they don't just live in rural America, they live in urban America, everything in between. This is something that unites our country. There are homework gap challenges in every state. And we're seeing some of the data from this. And, in Detroit, we found that school attendance fell by over 10% at the start of the school year. And in Los Angeles, they've said that as a result of connectivity troubles, as many as 15,000 students haven't been able to show up for remote class. So I've been talking about the homework gap before the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, and during the pandemic, because I think every student should be able to get the connection they need to continue with their education. And I think in the United States, we should make fixing the homework gap a priority. So that starts, of course, with fixing and closing the digital divide. And nationwide, we've got real work to do on that. We're going to have to spur broadband deployment in areas without infrastructure. And we're also going to have to work to improve affordability in areas that might have the infrastructure, but where parents or students can't afford to connect. So good news on that front. The FCC is working with Congress because in the appropriations legislation that was last adopted, it created something totally new called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it's the nation's largest ever largest ever program to help connect low-income households. We're going to get it started within the next month, and it provides a discount of up to $50 per month for a household to keep a broadband connection. And that number goes up to $75 a month for those living on tribal lands. The good news is we went out to the nation's broadband providers and said, can you participate? We now have more than 550 broadband providers covering all 50 states who are signed up to work on the program. So we're going to again go live with this within the next month, and I'm really excited for that. But like I said at the start, the homework gap is a really distinct problem in our nation's digital divide, and I think it deserves a distinct solution. And again, Congress has come through with the American Rescue Plan, because we were just provided $7 billion, a little over $7 billion, in fact, to update a program called E-Rate. E-Rate's the nation's largest education technology program, and the FCC has for decades been using it to connect our schools, our classrooms, and our libraries. So now with these new funds, we can also use it to help address the homework gap and help schools get kids connected at home. That's going to involve a mix of things: modems, routers, getting them signed up, possibly loaning out Wi-Fi hotspots from every school library. But the good news is that the FCC is right now taking a look at that legislation, collecting public comment, and then by mid-May, we'll adopt a decision about how to spend those $7 billion so that students across this country can get connected, and we can help solve the digital divide and the homework gap. So that's fantastic news. But if I could just close with a few other things, because I almost want to give some homework to those who are present here today. But one of the things I realized when I took over at the FCC is that the agency doesn't have a completely clear picture of where broadband is and is not. That affects commerce, learning, everything in this country. So one of my first actions was to stand up a broadband data task force to help us build really accurate and up-to-date maps about where service is and is not. Because when we want to solve the homework gap or any other internet-related problem in this country, that data is going to help. But here's the homework assignment, because it's got two parts. First, I had the FCC set up a website to collect stories about your broadband experiences in the communities where you live, where service is, where it's not, and what problems you're having. Your stories matter. We're going to survey them and look for patterns. So I'm going to encourage everyone who is here today to come and share. And second, you can actually also help the FCC by running speed tests. The FCC set up an app, the FCC Speed Test app, and you can put it on your mobile device and test your home Wi-Fi network. Now that's great because you'll learn exactly what upload and download speeds you're getting. But here's what's even better. When you choose to use that app, your anonymized data comes back to us. So we can get hundreds of thousands of data points about where service is and is not, and then use that to help improve the maps we have. So it's a twofer. You get to learn what's happening with your device, and you also get to help the nation solve some of its broadband and digital divide problems. So those are my homework assignments, if I could leave you with them. But now I am looking forward to talking to students. I'm looking forward to hearing from the League and telling me some more about what your experience have been like during this pandemic and how we're going to work together to make sure that no child's left offline.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman, for those introductory remarks and for the homework challenge of League of Innovative Schools. We will, if we can, drop some links to the tools that the stories tool and the other piece while we're in the session. So thank you for that. I'm excited to welcome our students to the table here with Chairwoman Rosenworcel. These are C-Summit students, so Students for Equitable Education Summit students that are joining us today. We have Andrea Della Victoria, who is a 12th grader at Roland High School at Roland Unified School District in California. We have Ashley Boyd, who is a 12th grader at Princeton High School at Princeton City School District in Ohio. And we have Isabel Ortega, who is a 12th grader at Middle College High School in Santa Ana Unified School District in California. So welcome all of you to this conversation. So we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts today. The way this format is going to work, everyone, is we're going to do a round of 3 questions with the students, and after each round, we're going to ask Chairwoman Rosenworcel to comment on what she's hearing and provide some perspective. And then after we finish with the student questions, we will open the floor to questions from the league. So we will take those questions either by chat or verbally. So students, let's go. We have a set of questions for you. So the first question, not surprisingly, is we'd love to just hear your experience of learning virtually from home. What has it been like? And touch on how you use technology to access learning in addressing that question. And so I'm just going to call on folks, and I'll switch order every question we have. Why don't we start with Ashley? So tell us what your experience of learning virtually from home has been like.
My experience has been pretty good. I come from a single family home, so like it's just me and my dad. And before the pandemic, our school mainly used technology to begin with. So when we shifted to home learning, there wasn't really much of a change because we always use like Google Classroom, Google Docs. Paper copies were becoming a rarity as our school continuously had paper shortages. And so online learning was kind of how our school was. We just happened to be in person. But then after the pandemic, getting in touch with people became a lot harder. Teachers had thousands of kids that they had to reach every day, and you would have a question at like 2 o'clock and they'd get you back at like 7 o'clock, or teachers would start grading work at like 10 o'clock at night. And so you wouldn't be able to contact them about it until the next day in the morning if you could get them through all their classes. So connectivity became like a really complicated thing for our school district, and keeping in touch with other students, or when teachers would put you in a group, you'd have to go sifting through Snapchats and Instagrams to get people's contact, to get them to talk with you, to get them to even get on the phone with you, if you could even do that. So.
Thank you, Ashley. Isabel, your thoughts.
Yeah, so I am here from Santa Ana. I've lived here for most of my life, and I think my experience has been a little bit challenging, just because, to be honest, when quarantine started, I was looking forward to the summer, as many as students are, right? To specifically for me, it was to get more involved in my community. And the shift in going virtual really put me in a place where I had to change everything, all of my schedule. And it was not only just a change for me, but also for my family. I live in an apartment of 2 bedrooms, but all of my family lives in 1 bedroom. And so, I have my sister and we have to share a space. And so with this, it brings issues of like the noise, as well as the connectivity that is here, because my parents can't afford the Wi-Fi, or because some of the bills are backtracked, so they can't, continue paying it, which, puts relapse in my education. Usually I am very dedicated in my education, because I know that it's a place where I can, go forward on, because my parents are both immigrants. They didn't have the opportunity to pursue education, and I see it as an outlet to help them, help myself, and help my community. And this relapse that there is in education that I have experienced throughout virtual learning is merely because of the connectivity, because of the cost. And I'm very resourceful. I've had to be very resourceful from a young age to reach out to resources. And so for my school, they offer hotspots in order for students to use. However, the best. At times, I'm in class because we use Zoom. And so we're in class and it's glitching out. I can't really hear, which, backtracks me in that class itself. And it just accumulates, which, gives me even more responsibility to be more adamant to get my schoolwork done by myself. So at this point, I'm teaching myself in a way. And I think that's been a difficult situation just because, as mentioned, I'm a first generation student. I'm learning as I go. And, having to learn by myself and without the help of my parents because they just can't help me has been very challenging to manage and to continue on forward. And I've heard like different experiences from here in my community as well, that many students are in the same situation. So yeah, that's been most of my experience with virtual learning.
Great. Thank you, Isabel, for sharing your story. And then Andrea, you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, so along with Ashley, my school has been starting to integrate more towards like electronic stuff like Google Classroom. And I feel like I'm kind of blessed with this because although it has been rough with using Zoom to educate students, it's been a little easier than other students because I've already had that leg up with most of my teachers preferring to use Google Classroom. But the only thing is when we're actually in class in Zoom, we're expected to be able to do our work while we're in that Zoom. So like split screening and things like that. And it takes a lot of our Wi-Fi to be able to work on our assignments and be in class and learn. And it's just the amount of time we spend on our computers, on our screens, it's just kind of like taken kind of the fun out of learning because learning should be a fun process. And it's kind of been this task that everybody's forced to do. And it's hard for teachers to adjust the work amount because they don't know how many hours we're spending actually in class with teachers who do lectures versus teachers who just assign the work so that we're not on the screen as long as other teachers. And having that adjustment was really hard. And just because I'm a person to be involved in a lot of extracurriculars, so all of my clubs has taken a hit, especially because it's to communicate with my advisor on certain events. Like we wanted to do Zoom performances for theater, but it was hard to communicate with my teacher because she was also having to adjust to the whole distance learning and teaching while still having her own kids in the home again because everybody's in the house trying to teach, trying to learn. And it was just hard because it took a hit on my mental health and just being in my room all day and just like not being able to socialize or do as much things as I did when I was in person, talking to my teachers, talking to my other classmates, and being able to learn in just that positive environment where you're constantly trying something new and stepping out of that comfort zone. Where in my room I'm just on the Zoom, but like next to me there's a bed, like I could just easily hop on the bed and they would never know. So it's like it's rough for that part and kind of separating learning time and just relaxing time in my room and socializing time, trying to be able to reach out to those friends who I haven't seen or heard from since over a year.
Wow, thank you all for sharing those thoughts. Chairwoman, I just want to see if you want to jump in here with your reactions, perspectives to share.
First of all, I'm really grateful for their raw candor. It's not been an easy year. And it's fair to acknowledge that. And it's hard to keep up in class. It's harder still when every student doesn't have the connections they need, not just the digital connections, but the physical connections where you see your peers, you see your students, you have a sense of being involved and in the mix, and that social distance has denied us all that. And what I hope most is as we leave this period, that we remember how challenging it was. And we work to fix these things by strengthening the bonds we all have and the reality that every student needs an internet connection to safely and consistently attend school.
One thing when I was talking with these students earlier, and ladies, I'm going to ask you about the barriers that you've encountered specifically around the technology. But there was, there was a mention about this notion of multiple people in a household needing the
Yeah.
same amount of access.
Yes, it is such an issue that doesn't get enough discussion. It's why I've consistently said when we solve the digital divide, we actually have to think very specifically about students. There was a video I saw from earlier in the summer, and I think it was an immigrant household, but it was a mother in a small kitchen with 3 students at a table pushed against the wall who are all trying to do their schoolwork off of a single hotspot, you know, probably in an apartment building where the 2.4 gigahertz band was really crowded. And every one of those students was probably not able to get the adequate bandwidth they needed to simultaneously be attending synchronous class. And I can't get that image out of my head because that image reminds us that it's not enough to just get the house connected. We've got to make sure every student has the bandwidth they need to effectively participate in their education. And it's why just talking about the digital divide is not enough. We have to talk about the homework gap, because we've got to come up with policies and plans to get every student the bandwidth they need, because that image of that mother with those 3 children just reminds you. And I think we just heard it too from Isabel, that it's not always enough to just be connected. You can be underconnected even if you have that connection.
Absolutely. The other piece that came up, which you touched on a bit when you mentioned the emergency broadband benefit, is the financial aspect. And Isabel touched on that as well, right?
Yeah, because, totally. Listen, I think actually one of the big faults of our digital divide discussion in the last few years is that we've talked about rural America and connecting the communities that are disconnected. We have absolutely got to do that. But we ignored the reality that there's an affordability crisis in urban and suburban America where the infrastructure may be present. And the student in that household is facing all the same barriers as the student in the rural community without infrastructure, because functionally they can't go to class, participate in homework, and really be effective with their schooling. So we've got to address that affordability problem, and it's just as important. And so the good news is with the appropriations law, we have this emergency broadband benefit, which is going to help. But I think for students, the better news is this $7 billion program to update the E-rate program to address the homework gap, because it gets to that problem I was describing with the mother with the 3 kids there, which is we got to come up with a solution that is laser-like focused on what kids need for school.
Absolutely. And then one last piece I'll mention is this notion of it being glitchy, right? And then actually deprecating the learning experience itself, where Isabel was saying, I am teaching myself because I can't even connect to this experience. And that's a powerful phrase, and just is sticking with me about this notion that I'm teaching myself because I'm disconnected.
First of all, kids working through this have extraordinary grit. But we owe it to them to do better. They should have a more reliable and consistent connection. And sometimes that's technology, sometimes that's affordability, but I think as a nation, we have to work on it. We owe it to every student to do better.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right, we're gonna do another round here. And I'm actually gonna change the questions a little bit. I'd love to hear how you would redesign your virtual learning experience. So think about the past year, and if you had a chance to redesign this experience that you've had over the past 12 months in terms of virtual, tell us what you would redesign. And let's start with Isabel on this one.
I think for me, something that I would really want to implement or increase like action and talk about is the non-English speakers or like their families as well. As I've mentioned quite a bit before, my parents don't know English and I have a younger sister. And so I've had the responsibility to help her out because, sometimes she can't get that extra help that she needs. And so I think this is something that's very important that needs to be addressed. If I were to redesign like this virtual experience to really take into account, as been mentioned before, every single story and every single reality of students and their situations, because certain as mentioned, like as with non-English speakers, sometimes they're left out of the discussion, or it takes more thought in order to bring them in. So I really think that it needs to be addressed, to help these families as well, and how the parents can help their students or any other resources to help out these families in order for them to take advantage of their education as much as they can. And as well as the engagement, I think it's a problem and something that can be addressed overall, the engagement aspect, because, I keep thinking back on my sister, and, I think, I've found a way to figure it out and try to help myself. But for younger students like my sister, helping them to take more advantage of their education as well, and providing them those resources that they need.
Thank you, Isabel. Ashley, thoughts on redesigning this virtual learning experience?
One thing I would do is, since it is virtual, at least for my school, keeping it virtual, that I can't even explain the amount of times that I've pulled up to the school to pick things up, to pick up books, to pick up this, to pick up worksheets. And it's easy for me because I learned how to drive the year prior, but I have friends who turned 16 that year or turned 17 that year, and they didn't get the opportunity to get their license because COVID shut everything down. So now they have to wait for their parents to come home from work, or they have to wait for a sibling, or they have to wait for an uncle or an aunt or Lisa from California to come all the way over and drive them to school. And a lot of these things are available online, like there's digital libraries. How about we assign that for students that can't come physically and get their books, and not penalize students for not being able to show up to the school building in person. I would also change just like the finances of everything. Our school charges a fee for technology, for supplies every year. And I just think that maybe this year that should have been something that, I know it would have been maybe financially hard, but something that our school may have needed to waive. As I've had friends that are like, even though it may be $20 or $30, it's like, we can't keep the lights on. So that $20, $30 is still a financial deterrent or financial irritation that they just can't afford to handle. And I think the third thing I would change is just timing, especially for our older classmen. I understand why younger kids have to go and they have to be on a strict schedule, because you have to get them, you have to make sure they know that it's still school and that things still have to be done. But for seniors and juniors, it was really stressful because I have friends that work. And at a certain point, I worked, and to deal with school and then have to literally go to work like 5 minutes after class ends, it was stressful. It was annoying because you got no downtime, and then you'd stay up until 3 a.m. doing homework just to get up at 5 to go to class, just to end class at 12 and then be like, oh, well, my shift starts. So now I got to go do that. And now we're doing it all over again. And oftentimes in the beginning, we would get penalized for not showing up to class, for not being there. But there'd be so much going on that you would think that it would kind of be okay, as long as I'm turning in the assignments, I'm doing the work, I'm doing the test, I'm there for the, what I would deem the important stuff. I feel like it should be okay for students to kind of figure out their own pathway, instead of forcing them to sit in a class that they're most likely 90% not paying attention to, that they're tired, that they're worn out, that they're not even absorbing the information anyway. And that could be remedied by just recording the Zooms, recording the Google Classroom, so that kids can just watch it on their own time, or using something like Edpuzzle, where it tells you if the student is watching. So you have to watch through the entire video to complete the assignment. And so that will let you know who's watching and who's not. And so there's ways to figure it out. But I think The big issue is each teacher has their own way of figuring out. Some teachers are like, oh yeah, I'll use Edpuzzle, and other teachers are like, well, I'm not going to record a single Zoom. And so you're just out of luck if you don't come to class, and that's just not helpful.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And then Andrea, you want to talk about how you would redesign the virtual learning experience?
For me, I would definitely have more kind of Zooms or any Google Classroom just meant for any and all students that need extra support, extra time to reach out to teachers that they need to, and maybe some tutoring to where some students are able to do that if you were in person. But since everything's online, you don't really have that extra support in learning as you would do before. So just having those sessions, maybe during lunch or after school with a tutor, or like just have people there to help. And that would be really good. And also just having some social events, like even though we all are tired of Zoom and tired of being online and just having your camera on and smiling, it's still nice to see other people's faces. And it's still nice to just have that conversation with others that you maybe not have seen a year ago, because everything's online. And even though some teachers say, oh, you have to keep your camera on for full points or participation points, everybody turns off their camera during class. So it's like you never really know who's there or who's in your class. Or just when it comes to group work, you either have a friend in that class that you can kind of like pair up with, or you're lost. So it's really hard to make those connections that you used to be able to do in the classroom online. And also with our school, our schedule has its pros and cons, but I think I like that we have Wednesday, just one class check-in, and we have the rest of the day to kind of catch up on our schoolwork or have our club meetings or anything like that. But also just Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, we have morning blocks with, which is like I think an hour and a half long for teachers to just have that lecture period and just be able to teach students. But afternoon classes are only like 30 minutes, and it's not long enough for teachers to dive deep and kind of teach, but it's too short to, but it's too long for teachers just to kind of have a check-in. So we have this awkward like 20-minute where the teacher doesn't know, like they don't want to get into it because they're going to go over the time, but like what are we going to do with those 20 minutes of just us being on our computers practically doing nothing, because all of our work is assigned during the morning blocks. So it's just kind of adjusting that schedule and trying to keep on finding a way where it works out for everybody and we get the most learning time instead of just being on Zoom just to check in for nothing, like for attendance, like as Ashley mentioned before, like attendance shouldn't just be the main priority, it should be learning. And if you're attending a class but your grades are taking a hit because you're not able to attend the afternoon classes because you have work or because you have other things to do, it's even though you're learning the same as other students who are able to attend those Zooms, your grades are still taking a hit. And even though, like, the important thing is because like GPA still matters, because when you're applying to college, they still look at your GPA, even though they have like did uh, SAT and ACT are not required, your GPA still matters. So if our GPAs are taking hits from not being able to attend, whether it be because we have responsibilities or because we don't have access like Wi-Fi, then it's really unfair for all of us to be able to do it.
Wow, you all kind of ran the entire kind of spectrum of issues that students are running into. So I appreciate kind of laying the landscape, and I got this Edpuzzle, I never heard of that before, where you can actually see if someone's online. That's interesting. It raises the question, well, one thing that we talked about is non-English speaking families having access and opportunities, and how we need to make sure that we have these families that feel like they can engage across the board. So Chairwoman, any reactions? I know you've heard a lot here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I'm really in awe of sort of like the diversity and strength of what everyone just came forward with. Because look, we just had an unexpected big national experiment in what online education looks like.
Mhm.
And the good news is we can look back on that and ask what worked. And when we do, we'd make a mistake if we didn't start with students and ask them,
Mhm.
what did they find most beneficial and what did they find least beneficial? And I'm already intrigued listening about education puzzles, being able to watch things on your own time and then prove that you did. I'm intrigued by the ideas of rethinking how we can do tutoring using digital technology. I just think we have an incredible opportunity as we come out of this to survey what worked and what didn't, but we absolutely should be asking students when we're figuring that out.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm curious about in the process that the FCC is using to kind of have more voices, and I love the story submission piece.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Are there conversations happening with parents and families and students that have been kind of unable to access devices and the internet?
So since we received this more than $7 billion appropriation, we opened a proceeding, and comments on how we should distribute it came in on April 5th. Reply comments are due April 23rd. And we get all sorts of well-known organizations and institutions with interest in education technology devices filing. My favorite comments, though, are always the ones that describe what the student experience has been like. They're the most informative. And like I said, the reply comments are due on the 23rd. So if anyone wants to organize some student comments and share, please do that, because we're not going to do better by education if we don't do better by students as we come out of this period. So, so if I could add another piece of homework, I'd just say anything that you want to organize with the students to share and file with us by the 23rd would be terrific. I know I'd love to look at it, and I'd certainly make everyone who works for me at the agency look at it too. That should inform our process going forward and figure out how their needs fit within the laws we have.
Great, thank you. We'll find that link too as well for commenting. Marlon, do you want to come in here and ask your question?
Just a question, just for some thoughts and advice. So I've got students and chairwoman here, hashtag Relentless Rosenworcel. Any thoughts or advice the four of you would share with us as we try to leverage the American Rescue Plan funds to tackle the homework gap in our communities, specifically how to inspire our city leaders to really go about not doing a Band-Aid approach to this, but really doing it the right way that is sustainable, that will help lift our communities for those that live in there?
I can start, because it's so good to see you, by the way. Hopefully I can get to Middletown, Ohio one of these days in the not too distant vaxxed future. I am really personally intrigued by some of the more creative things that school districts are doing around this country. We've seen experiments with Wi-Fi mesh networks. We've seen experiments with broadband that's blanketed throughout a community and then paid for by the school and the community itself in order to make sure every student's connected. We've seen some really incredible things done with CBRS spectrum in the 3.5 gigahertz band. In other words, we're watching in real time the creativity of a lot of American communities and educators about how to expand the availability of broadband to their community. Because sometimes it's not as simple as just handing out a Wi-Fi hotspot. Sometimes there might be something that's more creative and more sustainable. So there's some opportunities in the recent American Rescue Plan to consider about how we can support some of those through the E-rate program. I'm especially intrigued by doing so in rural communities or underserved communities where the service isn't adequate for the student population. That being said, I'll be super frank with you and tell you that I work right now at the FCC, which normally is supposed to have 5 members. It has 4. And to get things done, I need 3 votes. So it's not higher level math. And I'm not sure that my enthusiasm is shared by all my colleagues, but I hope that as we come out of this period, we can find ways to help support those initiatives through this funding or through subsequent changes in our rules. Because I think when schools in a low-cost way get creative about how to connect their students, we should make sure our policies support it.
Great, thank you. For the students, I want to ask a question about, same as our last session, and if you can actually talk about the technology and access piece, if you can zero in on that, that'd be great. What worked for you, if anything? If nothing, say nothing. But what worked for you with the technology and the access? If you can stay on that, that would be helpful. And anybody want to jump in first, feel free.
I have to be honest here, and I'm gonna say nothing worked. The only thing I would say was like helpful was taking use of Google Classrooms and connecting that way, but that's just one site. In terms of technology as a whole and like having access to Wi-Fi, even though that the school gave us Chromebooks, the school gave us hotspots, the hotspots don't work in my area just because we don't have any Sprint towers and they chose to use Sprint. So, and also the Chromebooks, it's not that good. It's laggy and it's hard to run multiple tabs and Zoom on that Chromebook. So it didn't work.
Great, thanks. Thanks for being candid. Other responses around the technology and access piece? What worked, if anything?
I think I have to throw back with, with what Andrea said, that nothing really worked. I think, as mentioned, having the platforms of Google Classroom, Canvas, in order to go back and do what I couldn't do during class, that was helpful in order to continue my education in that form. But when it comes to the technology and access during class itself, I don't think it worked because, the access to the resources, whether, it turned out to be, not as helpful as it was thought to be, with the hotspots going slower or the Chromebooks having audio issues or camera issues or just screen issues. So these issues that really come about with the technology itself, I really don't think that, it actually worked.
Thank you, Isabel. Ashley, you want to add any comments?
I mean, I'm gonna have to agree with both of them. Nothing worked. I mean, it's easy from my experience to say that, like, for me, everything kind of went pretty well, but we have a giant wealth divide in our school, like a gigantic one. And it's easy for upper middle class kids to say, like, well, everything worked. Okay, so it's all good. But for a good portion of our school, nothing worked. And so if it doesn't work for everyone, that means it doesn't work. And like Isabel said, things were glitching and laggy for a lot of people. You'd be in a Zoom and you would think that your camera was working, and then the teacher would all of a sudden say, I can't see any of you. I can't hear any of you. Where did everyone go? And you're all sitting right there thinking like everything's going smooth, and then it just stops working on one person's end, or somebody says, well, I can't hear, but the teacher's clearly talking, or Zoom randomly muting itself, or cutting off the video, or the smart screens detaching and not. And it created a whole slew of issues. And then even with Google Classroom is great. And it's a wonderful thing, but it's wonderful when it's used in complement to an actual classroom. It's terrible when it's literally your classroom. They have to assign work on there, and you have multiple teachers making things due at the same time. Our school ends at 12:30, and you'd have a teacher signing something for 12:35, and I'm in class until 12:30. So now I'm rushing for the last 5 minutes to try and get this in on time. Teachers would assume that if you didn't put something in on on Google Classroom, that you didn't do it. So then they would put your grade in, even though it wasn't due yet. Teachers would be trying to move so quick with the technology, but you'd be trying to do 1,001 assignments, but their day ends at 3, but my day ends at like 12 a.m. So I'm doing work up until that point, and they're trying to move quickly because they have so many students, but I'm trying to go through this tab to this tab to this, put them side by side. I have to read this article to answer this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to go here. And it became cluttered because there were so many platforms to go on at one time, so many classes to go on at one time. And things like Google Docs and Google Classroom and Edpuzzle can only do so much in complement to a classroom, but it became the classroom and it just got too jumbled.
Wow, thank you. I'm going to ask you all one final question and then invite Chairwoman Rosenworcel to comment. So if you have a person here in this Zoom who's at the federal level, at kind of the highest level of with the Federal Communications organization at the highest level, what advice or what would you say to Chairwoman Rosenworcel about, you have an opportunity right here, a few minutes to share what you would love to see at the highest level of this country. Who wants to jump in here first?
Bring it.
Bring it. Whatever you got. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Think about it. Well, maybe I'll prompt you a little bit. So when you think about access, Isabel, can you imagine what support you all could get that might help your access issues or your family to have equal access? Anything come to mind there? That'd be helpful. Or support for your family because you're immigrant, that support as well.
Yeah, so I was taking a few moments to think about it, just to give the best feedback that I can give and best input that I can provide. So I would say helping I know with younger siblings, helping the parents and giving the parents the resources they need in order to help the students that in that area, with younger folks. And with this, there's many people here in my neighborhood that parents, they don't know how to use technology. So maybe hosting the help for the parents to learn how to use technology. And it's going to be a timely process, but it's going to be worth it at the end because the parents will be learning and will be able to take action into this relationship of education between the parents and the students. So I think, really conveying this to the parents for younger folks and being able to create this relationship, as I've mentioned, but also with older students like myself, I would say giving them access to the different resources and trying experimenting with, if this doesn't work, then let's try something new. And, continue to develop these creative ideas, creative ways to better our access to the hotspot, to the technology itself. So just looking to new ways and new creative ways. And also I think, if this technology, in the process of helping ourselves with technology and the access being better in our communities, I think, looking to other outlets like the engagement part, or looking towards I think, as Andrea mentioned with mental health, I think, the social emotional wellness. So these different aspects of access to having a greater education and a greater experience to virtual learning would be helpful. I know, at least for my community, it would, bring it up a notch in order to help our education experience prosper and help, these folks take advantage of the education and, without the limitation of technology or access, and not that this discrepancy of where you live, your wealth, anything, all of these factors to take into account for the education that you should receive.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. Any other final comments, Andrea and Ashley, before we share some final thoughts?
I think that with this fund, I think that schools like mine should also be taken into great account because our school is considered a semi-public school. And we have Lincoln Heights as part of our school, and a lot goes on there. It's not just accessibility, it's also safety. It's also kids who may not be able to work in their neighborhoods because their neighborhoods may not be the safest. It's kids who, I don't know, you guys have probably may or may not have had this experience. It's kids who find it natural when you hear noise to get onto the floor, to not be able to be by windows, to not be able to walk outside at night, to not be able to see their siblings run in the yard because who knows what's going to happen. We've had students in our class be killed in Lincoln Heights. We've had memorials more times than I can count because of kids living in dangerous neighborhoods. So I think it's more than just, like Isabel said, accessibility. It's about focusing on the homes of the people that live in these communities. Because you can give someone all the access in the world, but if they're not in a situation to take advantage of it, it's pointless. You can give them 5G and you can put a Sprint tower right outside their window, but if they can't even sit there long enough to even connect, then it's all pointless. You have to focus more on just not only accessibility, but you also have to focus on safety and overall accessibility. Are they able to actually access legitimately the resources that are provided to them, or is it just something that's going to be there and not go to use because there's so much other things going on that whether you sat there by the student yourself and watched them, it wouldn't make much of a difference.
Thank you for sharing that. Anything, Andrea, as we wrap up around?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what they both said. And in general, it's just making sure you're not only providing the minimum to function, but the minimum to thrive. Students, even though we are given Chromebooks, we are given hotspots, we can't even access our Zooms and Google Classroom at the same time. So just making sure it's not just giving it to students to say you were able to provide to students, but also being able to provide what students need to learn in their class while um, being virtual learning. You need to make sure that what you're giving them is actually going to work and not just, oh, we're just giving you what we have. Hopefully it works for you.
And on that quote that you shared, Andrea, not just providing the minimum to function, but the minimum to thrive. We're going to end there with your comments, and so appreciative of you all taking time from school to be here with us today and share your thoughts. Chairwoman Rosenworcel, I don't know if you want to just share something to wrap up here.
Sure. No, I'm really struck by what Andrea said and about thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're going to make it out of this period, and we survived, but we got to really figure out now how our students can thrive. Mm-hmm. And I hope as we rethink education and connectivity and equity of opportunity, that we make sure that students like these have a seat at the table. So thank you for bringing them here today. Thank you for your absolutely real, raw, and honest comments, and also the poise with which you delivered them. I have some confidence in the future being able to see that. So thank you all, appreciate it.
Absolutely, and we have a big conference coming up with these students on April 24th, the C Summit, where they're going to be continuing to kind of share their voice. Chairwoman, I thank you again for being here. It's always really valuable to the league to hear your voice and to be connected to your work. We are incredibly supportive of your work and will continue to do so. We dropped into the chat the links that Chairwoman shared with us, and we'll share stories. We will do speed tests. We will do whatever we can to support the work that you're leading at the federal level. So thank you again, and we look forward. We'll always invite you back. So don't be surprised to get another email from me in the future. All righty, you take care.
All right, thank you. Stay safe. Bye.
Dwayne, I'm going to hand this to you as we wrap up and then take a break. at the end. Are we doing any more partner?
Yes, we have some partner sessions, but before we wrap up, just once again, great big thank you to Ashley, Andrea, and Isabel, and also to the Honorable Chairwoman, Ms. Rosenworcel, who run the world. Girls, thank you once again. And remember, League members, you have homework. Principal Smith will be checking. Make sure that you have done your homework. You heard it from the chairwoman. Once again, last plug, please ensure that you have registered and shared the C Summit with everyone you know with the pulse. They need to be there to hear from our young people.